Okay, for this last and final section of your chapter, I'm going to ask you to extend your imagination with me for just a little bit more. So remember, we're in the zombie apocalypse here, and you're on that road trying to make it to those life-saving critical supplies. And you've also managed to make the right turn at that fork in the road and have managed to avoid that really bad loop of fighting. But now, even though that we've made our way to that better route for resolution for your conflicts, we now have another problem to figure out. You see, as you're driving down this road, more and more issues just seem to keep coming up with your car. Maybe at first it's your gas warning light that goes off, and so you start thinking, man, I need to scrounge up some gas really soon here. Then maybe a few minutes go by and your temperature gauge goes off and it shows that your engine's overheating. And then maybe a few more minutes goes by and now there's smoke coming out from underneath your hood, and you also somehow manage to get a flat tire along the way too. Even though the road that you're on will lead you to resolution for your fights, there are still problems and issues that can come up along the way. You see, the point of this illustration is to help you conceptualize what it's like a lot of times when we get into fights within our marriage. In the last chapter, I described how conflicts, if done well, will seem like they cycle or loop, but in a good way. You might start off your fighting about one thing, but if you're doing your fights well, you'll probably find out there's another issue going on that's connected. Now, when you're stuck in a bad fighting loop, this is the kind of stuff that quickly leads to a lot of flooding, and how setting off multiple triggers can make conflicts complicated and really messy really quickly. But if you're following the route that was laid out for you here in this course, and you're able to stay on track with that healthy cycle that we talked about in the last section, you should be getting much more valuable information about what's going on in your fight. And it's accessing that information that will ultimately help you to find resolution to your fights. Think about it like this. Each cycle or iteration of that healthy conflict loop that you go through, it's like you're picking up another new piece of the puzzle. The more you cycle, the more pieces you acquire. Eventually, you'll have enough pieces to start putting things together and getting a much better idea of what the issue actually is in your marriage. But the difficulty is that each cycle requires so much emotional strength, so much gas in the tank. So you might have to pace yourself and pick up just a few pieces at a time. Take a break between conflicts and set up a bunch of proactive conflicts in order to pick up all those pieces that you need. Eventually though, what will happen is that you and your spouse will get better and quicker at finding those pieces so that you don't have to do as many cycles to get to the core stuff of what's driving your fights. So be patient with the learning process, and just remember that you're picking up puzzle pieces that might not fit together just yet, but in time they will. All right, let me get back to the main point of this section. After you go through a number of cycles and you start figuring out that you have so many different issues and puzzle pieces that are going on, the question becomes, what do you do with all those issues? The further you get into a fight, really dig down to the bottom of it, the more junk, the more issues, the more puzzle pieces are likely to come up and be exposed. So on one hand, we want to get access to all that information. We want to know all about those deep and underlying issues. But on the other hand, knowing about all those issues can feel overwhelming and cause us to not know what to do or where to go with it all. Think about that example I gave you at the start of the lesson. How would you deal with it if you're driving and you're about to run out of gas and your tire is flat and your engine's overheating? If it's just one of those things, then maybe you can figure out a plan to deal with it. But what do you do when you're confronted with everything at once? The purpose of this section is to help you organize and prioritize your issues that come up in a conflict cycle. Now, the first thing you have to understand is that having multiple issues come up in the fight is completely normal for every couple. The longer you're married, the more layered and complicated your conflicts are going to be. Now, the second thing that you should know is that part of the objective of good fighting is that a good fight will help you to uncover and identify all those issues. And that's really a good thing and one of the benefits of conflict. Remember, conflicts aren't just about getting resolution. They're about learning more about yourself and your spouse. And the discovery of these underlying issues is one of the major goals and benefits to doing conflict well in marriage. Now, the third thing to know is that you don't have to, and you really shouldn't try to, attack and resolve every issue at once or in one fight. You see, that's where most couples mess up in a conflict. They move on from one issue to the next, try to bite off more they can chew, and never actually resolve any of the issues that are going on. In the end, it can end up feeling a lot like whack-a-mole, where they're just chasing after issues but never getting anything actually resolved, which in turn can leave a couple feeling really frustrated and discouraged because it'll feel like nothing can ever get addressed and resolved without triggering 5 other fights along the way and making matters worse. The principle here is that it's better to do less in a fight, but better, than it is to do more but worse. In this last section, we'll talk through how to divide and conquer, to divide up your conflicts into smaller and easier to manage fights. When you can divide up your conflict better, you'll begin to see how there are different approaches and strategies that'll help you to get to resolution. I mean, you wouldn't use a hammer to paint your walls, for example, so we want to make sure that you have the right tool and approach for the specific kind of issue that you're dealing with. Divide up your issues, don't try to do too much at once, and you'll have a much better chance of resolving your issues gradually over time. So let's talk about how this actually works in a typical conflict. Let's say a wife gets into a fight with her husband about being late to pick up the kids for swim practice. Wife pitches to the husband a BTF structured pitch. When you're late for things like picking up the kids, it makes me think that other things like work take higher priority, which makes me feel sad, hurt, and disappointed. Now, let's say that the husband can be super resilient and ask good questions to catch well. So instead of getting defensive or blaming, he asks, okay, is this something that you feel is bigger than just this one incident? And if so, where else do you feel like this is the case? So they essentially go through another cycle or loop. She restructures her pitch to, okay, when you choose to say yes to things like work or parents, you choose to say no to me or the kids, which makes me think that we're just not on the same page about what's important or a priority in life, which makes me feel discouraged and maybe a little bit hopeless about our future. Okay, so that right there, that's just 2 cycles. Each one has a clear and concise pitch. It probably would have taken a lot of insight and processing for the wife to be able to verbalize all of that. It probably would have taken a lot of resiliency and genuine curiosity for the husband to listen to all that without becoming defensive. But with 2 cycles, there's a lot more depth and information now. We have a much better idea of what's the underlying issue in this conflict. Now, all we have to do is divide it up and stack the issues in order of priority. So let's see what we've got here. First, we have the most obvious problem of getting to places on time to pick up kids. So what lane do you think that goes in? If you guessed problem solution, then you're right. One issue to resolve is how we make sure that we get to places on time to get kids picked up. The clue here is when there's a specific logistical or tactical problem that requires a solution. Usually this is the presenting issue, the trigger, or the first and most obvious problem to address. But there's so much more going on in this conflict. Second, we have a potential narrative from the wife that calls into question priorities and whether work or parents tend to usurp or override commitments to wife and kids. One of the things that she's lamenting is the fact that they both seem to be on different pages when it comes to priorities, and that these differences in priorities are big enough to where it causes conflicts and failed expectations multiple times throughout their marriage. Now, if you guess that this issue goes in the alignment lane, you'd again be correct. The key giveaway here is that when there are competing values and principles that end up causing friction between husband and wife. Then, the last thing here is the wife is bringing up some sore feelings about the matter. She's describing feelings of sadness, being hurt, disappointed when things like this happen. And if you guess that this issue belongs in the hurt lane where emotions get addressed, you'd once again be right. The easiest way to tell if an issue goes in the hurt lane is when there are emotions involved that need to be understood and resolved. Now, all these pitches have the wife positioned as the pitcher and the husband as the catcher. And all of them belong at that tier 3 level because they're all conflicts between husband and wife. Let's say, for example, the wife shared how her own father would forget her at school sometimes when she was a kid growing up, leaving her feeling neglected and unimportant. That would be a tier 2 level because it's about her feelings and issues that have nothing to do with her husband and everything to do with her own childhood. And it'd also be in the hurt lane as well since it's about her own feelings and emotions that need to be understood. So you see, in just a few minutes of going through a healthy conflict cycle, we can get access to 3, maybe 4 issues that go far deeper than what's at that surface level trigger for the conflict. And the deeper we get, the closer we are to actually resolving the issue. The hard part is breaking it down, digging into the conflict and dividing it up for us to be able to see better. But once we divide the conflict up, the next step is now we're tasked to order and stack the issues. Which of these things should the husband and wife tackle first? The answer is it really doesn't matter just so long as both of them are on the same page and agree on which one to focus on and that they're not trying to do all of them at once. This conflict might need to play out over 3 or 4 proactive conversations that they schedule out and plan over time. But having said that, in my experience, it's generally a good idea to address hurt lane issues first because it's really hard to address any other alignment issue or surface level problem when there's an active unresolved hurt in play. So for example, it'd be hard for this wife to be ready to work through aligning with her husband or figuring out how to get kids picked up on time when she has some sore feelings that have been built up over time. So my general rule of thumb here is to address emotions first in that hurt lane before anything else. So as you're going through the cycles of conflict, see if you can separate out issues better. Ask yourself if you can place something from the conflict that you're dealing with in the problem solution lane, in the alignment lane, or in the hurt lane. See if you can separate it out into tier 2 level stuff and tier 3 level stuff. The structure given to you here is meant to help you divide and conquer better, so use it. It'll help to ensure that you don't miss major underlying drivers and to also help you not get so lost and overwhelmed either. The key skill that I want you and your spouse to be able to pick up here in this section is to constantly be evaluating the content of your conflict and to see if you can divide it up into smaller chunks. That will in turn help you to drive down deeper into your fights and pinpoint with surgical precision what the most important issues are for you to resolve. This is the divide part of the lesson. The conquer part is actually all of part 3 of this course. And in those last few chapters, I'll cover how to really drill down in doing alignment lane and hurt lane conflicts. For now though, your key objective is to start learning how to deconstruct and divide your fights up into more manageable pieces. So to summarize here, if you can anticipate that your fights are going to naturally cycle and loop a few times, and so long as you can maintain a healthy posture of emotional regulation and resiliency throughout the cycles, then you'll be able to dig and get access to better underlying issues in the conflict. Once you discover and have access to multiple pitches or issues, or all the puzzle pieces if you will, you can then order or stack them, taking one small bite out of your conflict at a time. Following a healthy flow and cycle like this will help you to keep your conflicts clear and manageable, and it'll help you to unveil deeper issues that are really driving your conflicts so that they don't keep reoccurring. Okay, that's it for this chapter that introduced you to how to plan and prepare for your fights better, how to be intentional about the direction that your fights go, and how to dig into and handle multiple issues that usually come up out of your fights. In the next chapter, we'll go through a few key things that you'll need to know to make sure that you and your spouse know how to do in order to keep your fights safe and constructive. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next video.